Update 2. I think my husband fathered his best friend's children, and now one of them is attracted to my daughter. I didn't expect to have another update so soon, but after my last post, I did a lot of thinking about my kids. I realized I needed to warn Sophie about the situation immediately. It didn't matter what it meant for Luke, or if it meant the kids would find out. She had to know what she might be getting into. So, I discreetly kept her out of school. We returned home last night, and this morning, I dropped everyone off, saving Sophie for last. I drove right past her school and told her we needed to talk. It's always a frightening thing for a teenager to hear from a parent. But I quickly reassured her that she wasn't in trouble. She needed to understand why Amy and I were fighting and why her dating Tom was out of the question. I gently explained my suspicions about Luke's closeness to Amy and Tom's resemblance to him. If Luke and Amy had been intimate at some point, that could lead to serious complications. Sophie listened quietly, and after a long pause, she suggested we talk to Tom about it too. I agreed, and she texted him to meet us. They both skipped school today, but Sophie gets straight A's, and this was too important to ignore. When Tom arrived, Sophie had me relay everything I had told her. I apologized for any impression I may have given that I didn't think he was good enough for her, and for not telling them the truth sooner. Then, something unexpected happened. Sophie and Tom exchanged a knowing glance. Sophie spoke first, with Tom backing her up. They revealed that they had already suspected something was off with Luke and Amy. Tom had overheard questionable conversations, and even sounds coming from Amy's room that he wished he could forget. They had both wondered if Luke was having an affair. They even agreed that because of Kaylee's allergy, Luke might be her father. If that was true, the rest of Tom's siblings could be Luke's as well, and Tom himself could potentially be Luke's child. They had come up with a plan. It turns out they weren't in love, they were just best friends. They didn't want to blow up our family without more evidence, which Tom was trying to gather. Sophie hesitated to tell me the truth because she didn't want to shatter me, unaware that I was already suffering in silence. We both cried, and I made sure she knew none of this was her fault and that I loved her very much. So here we are. Sophie and Tom already know they could be half-siblings, but they aren't interested in being a couple. Their plan was to create a little drama to force Luke and Amy to confront the situation rather than let it continue. They had staged every flirtation and inappropriate touch to make Luke and Amy sweat. When I reacted instead, it threw them for a loop. They couldn't understand why I cared more than the actual cheaters. We even shared a laugh when Tom mentioned he was a bit offended that I was against him dating Sophie. I jokingly asked if he didn't think she was gorgeous, and he shrugged it off, saying she was, but so was his English teacher, and he wasn't asking her out either. Now, the question is where to go from here. I feel relieved to have shared this with Sophie, like an elephant has lifted off my chest. Having her and Tom in my corner means a lot to me. Even though I've confirmed that Luke is involved with Amy, I kind of knew that already. Tom has volunteered to submit his DNA for comparison with Luke's, and both he and Sophie advised me not to tell Luke and Amy about this, which I agree with. They're completely on my side, and that means more to me than I can express. Tom is even trying to set up a camera in Amy's room to catch Luke and her together. Sophie told me outright that I needed to divorce her dad, and hearing that from her made it clearer than ever. She's right. I still miss my husband after 30 years of him being gone. I met the love of my life in 1987 when I was just 15. Some might think it's a crazy story, but it's true. He was 18, and I always visited this convenience store after school. Being only 4'10", I often needed help reaching things on the top shelf. One day I asked this guy to get something for me. He barely spoke any English, and I had to point to what I wanted. But I thought he was quite cute. He was skinny and good-looking, and I developed a crush on him. We started hanging out by his old car, just talking. He was Mexican, had dropped out of school, and struggled with addiction. Despite that, he was incredibly smart with numbers and fixing things. I often wondered how we communicated, but somehow we made it work. Our lives took a turn when I got pregnant. I was a naive teenager, not thinking about the future. I begged him to take me away, and after a lot of tears, he agreed. He wanted me to have the baby, finish school, and marry someone good. But he couldn't bear to see me cry. Back then, we got a court date and married right after arriving in San Francisco. He found a job, and we rented an old house. It wasn't small, but it was definitely worn. He was always there for me during the pregnancy. I was self-conscious and cried often, especially when the house creaked at night. He would check the attic and always rubbed my back and feet before bed. He never let me carry anything heavy and never got annoyed when I yelled for help reaching things. We were best friends, relying on each other. But when our baby was just a year old, he left due to immigration issues. That baby, Matthew, became the best thing that ever happened to me. Even when my husband was gone, Matthew always made me smile. Being a young mother had its perks. I felt like I could play more. Tony came back when Matthew was 5 and had quit all the drugs. Those were the best years of our lives, despite the tough moments of withdrawal. I had to help him dress because his hands shook, and I cried seeing him so skinny. Matthew and Tony got along wonderfully, and we even tried for another baby, but things didn't work out. Sadly, Tony relapsed secretly and left out of guilt. I think he felt suicidal at that time. If I had known, I would have done everything to keep him here, but he left anyway. It was just me and Matthew, who was only 7 then. A year later, the police came to tell us Tony had overdosed in Florida. I spent all my savings to bring his ashes back to San Francisco. He was just 26. I cried a lot when I received the ashes, and they still sit in my cupboard. I've never dated anyone else. I still miss him, and I'm just here alone. But my son lives down the street, and I get to babysit my grandkids, so I guess my life is okay. Honestly, I cried while writing this too. It's a crazy story, and some might not believe it, but I hope it entertains you at least. This blew up in another sub, and people suggested I post it here. So yeah, cross-posting. I want to share a story from my time working at a financial firm back in 2000. We had about 1,800 employees with a sales force of 200. I was one of those salesmen. Every April, we held our annual meeting, and it was a big deal. The CEO delivered a speech celebrating the company's best year ever. We were all excited about the bonuses we had earned, which were based on our sales performance. In May, we submitted memos justifying why we deserved those bonuses. I detailed the sales growth in my territory and felt confident, but when June arrived, my bonus was 0. Not just mine, less than 20% of the sales team received bonuses. The atmosphere on the sales floor turned chaotic. Everyone was furious, and emails flew back and forth, filled with anger. Supervisors were caught in the crossfire, trying to explain why they received bonuses while their teams did not. For a week, productivity plummeted. Many of us stopped showing up, and those who did were just as frustrated as I was. I started reading job ads at my desk, refusing to answer calls or make sales. When my boss confronted me, I told him I wouldn't work until I received the bonus I had earned. The next day, I was called into the regional sales manager's office. She asked me to explain my actions, but I told her she already knew. I calmly laid out how much money the company was losing by not having me sell. The day after that, I met with the national sales manager. He acknowledged my frustration and hinted that I would receive my check soon. I told him I wouldn't start working again until I had that check in hand. The following day, an email went out to the entire sales force announcing that bonuses would be issued shortly. I received a personal email from the national sales manager, promising to hand-deliver my check. When he arrived, I thanked him for the check and handed him my resignation, effective immediately. I requested my unused vacation pay before leaving. As I cleaned out my desk, a coworker also resigned. We ended up celebrating at a bar across the street. In the following months, I learned that even after issuing the bonuses, the company lost about 20% of its sales force. It was a clear example of corporate greed, and I was glad to be out. The money we were owed was not just a bonus. It was compensation based on a predetermined formula. Everyone knew what they had earned, and the company had a long history of fair compensation. So yeah, that's my story. Sometimes standing up for what you deserve can lead to unexpected freedom. Karen can't comprehend I don't work in the OR. I work at a level 1 trauma center, which means we handle all kinds of emergencies, and we never close. My role is in sterile processing, a critical department that cleans, repacks, and sterilizes reusable instruments for everything from minor procedures to major surgeries. Without us, hospitals simply couldn't function. One weekend, while working, I was coming back from a break and had to pass by some family consultation rooms. It's important to note that in sterile processing, we wear the same scrubs as the operating room staff. This often leads to confusion about who we are. As I walked by, a visibly anxious man flagged me down. I had my earbuds in, so it took me a moment to respond. "Can I help you?" I asked. He demanded to know where his wife was, insisting she had been in surgery for over an hour without any updates. I explained that I didn't work in the OR and couldn't provide information. "Why can't you tell me anything?" he pressed. "Sir, I don't know who you or your wife are, and I really can't help you," I replied. He raised his voice, insisting I needed to find out what was happening. I calmly told him not to yell at me and reiterated that I worked in sterile processing. Just as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "Hey, get your hands off me," I shouted. In that moment, a nurse from the OR appeared, witnessing the escalating situation. She quickly ran to get security. Adrenaline surged through me as I prepared to defend myself. When the public safety officers arrived, they separated us and took my account of what happened. I could hear the man yelling from the other room. Eventually, I was allowed to return to my department to fill out an incident report. As I walked back, I saw him being escorted away in handcuffs. I reported the incident to my supervisor and completed the paperwork. I learned that assaults on healthcare workers are alarmingly common, especially in high-stress environments like hospitals. While I understand that being in a hospital can be overwhelming, it's never an excuse for violence. This was my first experience with such an incident, and I realized I need to improve my de-escalation skills. I also learned about some training courses available at the hospital, which I plan to attend. I do feel for that man's wife. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for her to wake up without her husband by her side, and I wish he had managed his emotions better. This was a first for me, and I'm still processing what happened. I'll keep you all updated if anything else comes up. ITA for initiating a divorce while my wife is in the hospital after a car accident. This is a story about a difficult decision I had to make while my wife was recovering from a serious car accident. My wife had 2 kids from a previous relationship, and we had 2 more together. She was a terrible driver, but she refused to see it. Despite multiple accidents and even a suspended license, she continued to drive recklessly. I would often watch her reach into the back seat to handle a child instead of pulling over. One day, she got T-boned because she took her foot off the brake to pick up my son's soother. Thankfully, only she was injured, but all 4 kids were in the car. I finally reached my breaking point. I told her that while she could endanger herself, if I or our children were in the car, she needed to focus. When she was finally able to drive again after rehab, I reminded her of our conversation. I expressed my love for her and her kids, but I made it clear that if she ever drove recklessly again, our relationship would be over. I would make sure she couldn't drive with our kids in the car. She cried, insisting that she never meant to put anyone in danger, but I pressed her on how she could have taken her hands off the wheel and her foot off the brake all at once. I didn't think I was being unfair. My children's safety had to come first. I did everything I could to help. I drove as much as possible, stopped drinking when we went out, and even traded my beloved car for a larger SUV to accommodate everyone. I offered to pay for Uber rides when I wasn't available, but she enjoyed driving too much. Her ex and her parents supported my concerns. They warned her that if she continued to endanger their kids, there would be serious consequences. Yet, she felt we were being unfair, arguing that she loved her kids and would never intentionally harm them. Then came the day of her accident. She was involved in a single-vehicle crash and was seriously injured. I visited her in the hospital, but afterward I went straight to a lawyer. I was seeking full custody with only supervised visitation for her. I couldn't wait for another incident that could injure or kill one of our children. I felt terrible for initiating a divorce while she was in such a vulnerable state. But I had to protect my kids. Months later, I learned that my ex had suffered further accidents due to her driving habits. I knew I had made the right choice for our children's safety, but it didn't ease the pain of losing her as a co-parent. In the end, I lost a partner I still cared about, and my kids lost their mom. It was a heartbreaking situation, but I had to prioritize their safety above all else. Update: my girlfriend got an STD on her Europe trip. 1 year later, all of you were right. I'm an idiot. I want to share my experience, and I hope it resonates with someone out there. My ex came home from a trip to Europe with multiple STIs, and I was naive enough to believe she hadn't cheated. We had a hall pass agreement, but it came with strict rules about honesty. I didn't learn the truth until after we broke up, but we decided to continue as business partners. After my last post, I asked Elsie to join me for a therapy session. I wanted a mediator to help us communicate without it turning into a fight. Unfortunately, she felt attacked, and it led to a few rough days filled with arguments. Eventually, we seemed to have a breakthrough. We agreed to work on our business together as friends, but I often expressed my concerns about her honesty. She insisted I could trust her and swore she wouldn't back out of our business agreement. However, on the anniversary of her trip, she went back to Barcelona with her best friend, Leah, who has a history of cheating. This really affected me. I decided it was time to move on and told her I was going to start dating. That's when everything fell apart. She lost it, screaming, crying, and even throwing things. She claimed she thought we would get back together, and that my dating someone else was worse than her past betrayal. I encouraged her to visit friends to cool off, and suggested we work on healthy boundaries in therapy. She went to stay with Leah and never returned. Over the next few months, we went back and forth, but ultimately, she decided to cut ties completely. I begged her to mediate and find a way for me to run the business without her. I was open to any arrangement, even finding investors or getting a loan to buy the building. Instead, she gave me a 3-day notice to vacate, claiming I was trespassing. After quitting my job 2 years ago to work on the building, she basically said I was out of luck. So I got a lawyer who informed her we had an agreement and that a lease was necessary. She responded with a new 10-day notice to vacate, which my lawyer said was illegal. Then, just a few days ago, she shut off the water and changed the locks without warning, 5 days before I was supposed to leave. I wanted to share this to say that you were all right about her. I should have trusted my instincts and gotten everything in writing. I'm likely facing months in court and hefty legal fees. Please, learn from my mistakes. Protect yourself, and don't hesitate to get a lawyer when making agreements. And if you can, be kind in the comments. I already feel foolish for trusting someone who clearly wasn't trustworthy. Enjoy your free smart home devices. So here's the deal. I had built a collection of smart home devices over a few years before we decided to move to a different state. Most of them were smart switches on the wall. Being a bit of a tech enthusiast, my setup was quite complex and required some tinkering. For instance, I had some devices configured to operate without reaching the cloud, meaning they could only be controlled through my home PC. Once my computer was off the network, those devices became essentially unusable, including the front door camera doorbell. A few years ago, we put our house up for sale in a hot market and received an offer right away. I mentioned to the friendly buyers that I would be taking my smart home equipment, since it was set up in a specific way that wouldn't work for them. They didn't object, but I didn't explicitly include that in the contract. My oversight. As the closing date approached, I asked the buyers if they wanted to purchase the bundle ready to go. I offered to reprogram all the devices for them and help set everything up. Instead, they decided to involve their lawyer, who claimed I was breaking the contract by taking the wall switches. My lawyer tried to explain that removing the devices would actually benefit them, since they would be unusable without my computer and required special equipment to reprogram. But their lawyer wouldn't budge. Eventually, my lawyer asked if I had any attachment to those devices. Honestly, I didn't. They weren't that expensive. I just didn't want to go through the hassle of setting everything up again. So I complied. I left the switches in the wall, but decided to have a little fun with it. Since they were still mine until closing day, I explored some new features on the switches. One feature was a built-in schedule that didn't require any network. I set the entertainment room lights to turn on at full brightness randomly at night, around the time people usually watch movies. I also programmed the bedroom switch to turn the ceiling lights and fan on and off randomly at night. Plus, I had nice cabinet lights in the kitchen, and I bought a separate Wi-Fi controller to replace the original one, which wasn't attached to the wall. Technically, that was mine to take, and I did. It might have been a bit petty, but if the contract was their leverage, it was mine too. I realized afterward that this was a flawed contract, and I was partly to blame. However, leaving the equipment as it was, while taking my computer, would have rendered the devices unusable. I couldn't understand how that would help anyone. From my conversation with their lawyer, it seemed he convinced them to stand their ground because they thought they were getting a good deal. No amount of explanation could make him see that they really weren't. Fiancé left me due to my cancer diagnosis. I left her destitute. This story begins 4 years ago, and while the sting has faded, the memory remains vivid. We dated for 4 years, and I thought we had a great relationship. We were both established professionals, each with our own homes in the same neighborhood, and both had daughters living with us. Her daughter was 11, and mine was 16 when we met. We had plans to marry, build a house, and raise our daughters together. She had recently been diagnosed with a neurological disease that would eventually require her to use a wheelchair, so we were designing a home that would be ADA friendly. I invested around $30,000 into her house, doing landscaping and construction to increase its resale value. We had an agreement that I would be paid upon the sale of her home, but I never pushed for it. Fast forward 6 months. We were looking at properties and finalizing drawings for our new home when I started feeling unwell. I couldn't eat, was constantly vomiting, and noticed blood. My abdomen became swollen, which was unusual since we both maintained healthy lifestyles. I went to the doctor, and during this time, she began experiencing cognitive issues due to stress at work, leading her to take a pay cut. After a month of tests, I learned I had a golf ball-sized tumor in my stomach and would need chemotherapy. As I began treatment, she spent more time at my place, helping me out. I suggested we sell one of our homes and move in together until our new house was built. I had good insurance and a long-term illness plan, which would ease our financial burden. But shortly after that conversation, she grew distant. Her daughter stopped spending time with mine, and she made excuses to avoid seeing me. Then came the shocking text. "I love you, but I can't see myself taking care of someone this sick in the long term. I don't think we should see each other anymore." It broke me. I had opened my heart to her after losing my wife when my children were so young. The next day, I packed her things neatly and left them on her porch to avoid an awkward encounter. As I walked around to the back, I saw her on the couch with a man she had introduced as a lifelong friend. I had shared meals and vacations with them. I chose not to confront her and simply texted that her belongings were on my porch. Months later, I learned from his ex-girlfriend that they had been involved for some time, right around when we were finalizing our plans. I was furious and felt a need for revenge. I had finished my treatments and was feeling better when I found a file containing $32,680 in unpaid invoices for the work I had done on her home. I sent them to my attorney to start lien proceedings. It turned out I acted just in time. She was about to sell her house. With interest and attorney fees, she ended up with about $10,000 after selling her home, forcing her to back out of buying another and move in with her daughter and grandchildren. She even had to leave her job and go on disability. I ran into her a year later, and she looked like she had aged 20 years, now in a wheelchair. We exchanged brief pleasantries, and I moved on. A few days later, her younger daughter reached out, wanting to hang out. I gave a vague answer and continued with my life. Then her ex called to apologize for how she left me. I thanked her for the call, but kept it short. She started texting me, and after a few weeks, she asked if we could rekindle our relationship. I replied, "I can't see myself taking care of someone so sick in the long term. Remember the box on your porch? Did you think your friend brought that over from my house? Good luck to you. Goodbye." Sometimes I feel a twinge of guilt over this, but not often. Let them eat cake. Long ago, back in the before time, I worked for one of those bulk warehouse club stores. My job was simple: I was in charge of gathering the shopping carts. It wasn't the worst job I'd ever had. I got plenty of exercise, spent time outside, and mostly avoided interactions with the members, as we were required to call them. But working alone in the parking lot had its downsides. The store had a reputation for being cheap, so I often found myself managing a variety of carts. The classic ones, kiddie carts that looked like cars, electric scooters, and the bulky flatbeds. Whenever someone needed help loading their purchases, I was the one they called. As you can imagine, on busy days, it became incredibly difficult to keep enough carts available. Our story begins on one of those hectic days. I was chugging along, trying to keep up with the influx of people buying bulk goods. Suddenly, I got a call on the radio from my manager. "Top Gorilla 17, we need you to help some members load their purchases," he said. I replied, "I'd love to, but I'm barely keeping up out here." "Just do it. You can afford to stop gathering carts for 2 minutes," he insisted. Not wanting to push my luck, I complied. After spending 20 minutes loading people's purchases, I returned to find the vestibule nearly empty, except for a line of carts and her. She was the epitome of an entitled customer, tapping her foot impatiently. "Where are the big flat ones?" she demanded. I blanked for a moment. "I'm sorry?" "Ugh, where are the flat ones?" "Oh, you mean the flatbeds. I was just helping some other members load their merchandise and haven't had a chance to." "I don't care about your excuses. You have one job, and a trained monkey could do it." I just wanted her to go away, so I said, "Sorry, ma'am. I'll grab one from the parking lot for you." "You'd better," she replied sharply. I went back out to the lot and found a line of flatbeds blocking several parking spaces. I pushed them all into the vestibule, where she waited, grumbling about how I was wasting her time. I separated one from the rest and brought it to her. "I'm terribly sorry about the wait, ma'am." She glared at me with utter disdain. Unbelievable. With that, she stormed into the store, leaving me to return to my duties. About 15 minutes later, I saw her pushing her flatbed toward her car, still complaining about stupid people on her cell phone. You know what she had insisted on having a flatbed for? A cake. Not even a big cake, just a small round one. As I watched, she continued to rant about how I nearly ruined her precious baby's birthday party. Then, the most glorious thing happened. While still clutching her phone, she tried to pick up the cake with one hand. The plastic topper popped off, and she spilled the cake all over her expensive outfit. Seething with rage, she locked eyes with me. "You, get me another cake, now." I smiled and said, "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. I've got one job, and these carts won't gather themselves." I walked away, a grin on my face, as her shouts faded behind me. I've had my share of difficult customer interactions, but this one really took the cake.